I believe that every day a human being lives, every day that they live without their purpose, they're ripping off the planet. I mean, they're really ripping people off. And
this is the L3 Leadership Podcast, episode number 144. What's up, everyone, and welcome to episode number 144 of the L3 Leadership Podcast. My name's Doug Smith, and I'm the founder of L3 Leadership. We're a leadership development company devoted to helping you become the best leader that you can be. In this episode, you're going to get to hear an interview that I did with Rick Sapio. He's the CEO of Mutual Capital Alliance, Inc. Rick's TED Talk has been watched over 1 million times on YouTube. He's overcome some incredible obstacles, which you'll hear about, and he's very passionate about creating 1 billion entrepreneurs all around the world. But before we jump into the interview, just a few announcements. Number one is, if you're new to this podcast, we are committed to bring you 3 or 4 episodes every single month to help you grow your leadership skills. One will always be from our leadership events. One will be an interview that I do with a high-level leader. And then once a month, you'll get a personal leadership lesson by me. If you've been with us for a while, it would mean the world to me, and I mean the world if you would just hop on iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating and review. It really does make a difference, so thank you in advance for that. And lastly, I want to thank our sponsors, Henny Jewelers. Henny Jewelers are a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny, and his family, and my wife and I actually got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers, and we just think they're an incredible family-run business. They not only have great jewelry, but they also invest in people, which is what we really love about them. John gave Laura and I a book to help us prepare for our marriage. In fact, they give a book to every engaged couple to help them prepare for marriage. And he's been consistently investing in me as a leader now for many years, and I just appreciate them and their company so much. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. Our other sponsor is Alex Dulandon Real Estate Resources. Alex is a full-time realtor with Keller Williams Realty, whose team is committed to providing clients with a highly effective premier real estate experience throughout the greater Pittsburgh region. Alex is a member and supporter of L3 Leadership, and he would love the opportunity to connect with you. He's a phenomenal guy and a phenomenal young leader. If you want to learn more about Alex and you're looking for a house, go to pittsburghpropertyshowcase.com. With that being said, just a little intro on Rick before we jump into the interview. As I mentioned, Rick's a lifelong entrepreneur, and he started his first business at a bicycle repair shop after the death of his father when he was just 13 years old. Since then, he's founded more than 20 companies. Rick's the 7th of 9 children, and he was raised by his mother, who had struggles with serious lifelong depression issues. His TED Talk's been viewed over 1 million times on YouTube, and he has a passion for building entrepreneurs. And he was just a phenomenal leader. I really enjoyed this interview. You're going to get so much out of this. We talk about the loss of his dad, how he got out of that terrible situation that he was in. We talk about mentorship. We talk about family. We talk about productivity, entrepreneurship, and so much more. Get your pen and paper ready. This one is amazing. Check it out. We're going to jump right into the interview with Rick. Enjoy. Well, hey, Rick, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And in researching you, I want to get a little context and give people context for who you are. And as I researched you, I know you were one of 9 children. And when you were young, you had some tragic things happen. You lost a brother, you lost a father, and your mom had a few issues as well. Can you kind of fill in the holes in that story and talk about how that experience shaped you?
yeah, absolutely. So around the time that my mother found out she was pregnant with me, she found out that my 4-year-old brother was dying of cancer. And that all happened in the same week.
Jeez.
And so my family often said, because I was the 7th, Frankie was the 5th. And through the entire pregnancy, they were going back and forth to the doctor for chemotherapy. And it was a tragic thing that she went through. And she had mental issues because of it that she never overcame. So she became bipolar. At least it was more pronounced at that time. And so, long story short, when I was born on October 26, 1963, my brother Frankie died on November 5th, 1963, in the same hospital room.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So in those days, if you had a cesarean, you were in the hospital for 2 weeks. And so he was dying in the same hospital, and they ultimately moved him into that room. So I had to live with, as a child, whenever I was, rambunctious as children can be, my mother was, like, why was it Frankie and not you? I mean, that's how bad it was. And I'm not telling that story to make anybody feel sorry for me. I am telling that story, and I can continue it, because the parents that I see out in the world, I've got 4 children right now, 3 years old, 5, 7, and 9. So 3, 5, 7, and 9-year-old all together in one house. And my wife and I have our hands full with 4 kids. But what I noticed with all my friends who have kids our kids' ages is we want to put a pillow under our kids' butt in case they fall down, they won't get hurt. And the most successful people that I know, most of them came from really horrible situations and tragic in many cases. So why are we taking away our children's independence and their ability to learn by putting a pillow underneath them so they don't hurt themselves? That's something to think about as I tell you the rest of the story. Yeah. My father went bankrupt when I was 6, and again when I was 9 or 10, and he had 9 mouths to feed, and he didn't have an education. And this is burned into my mind. When I was in 6th grade, I was 11. My dad came home and he announced to the family over dinner that he had incurable cancer. It was the first time he went to the doctor because his back hurt. And it turned out he had tumors all over his body, and they gave him 6 weeks to live after one doctor visit. So, you know, I already had a fragile mom to begin with, and then this happened. And one positive was he ended up living 2.5 years. And during that 2.5 years, he said, look, your mother's not going to support you. You've got to support yourselves. And he taught us a lot about being gritty, you know, going out and doing whatever it takes. And that was the first time I had a real job, quote unquote. The New York Daily News had to be delivered before 5:30 a.m., 7 days a week, rain or shine. And I had 200 people to deliver to, and they would drop it off at like 4:30. I had to wrap it up and deliver it to my 200 customers. But the funny thing about that story is my wife and I right now have a girl living with us from Italy. She's 16, and she's an exchange student. And I like to work out, and I'm trying to get this girl motivated. She's I hate to use the word typical, but she's a typical teenager. And just recently I said, you know, I'm working out tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Why don't you come with me? And she goes, 7 o'clock on a Saturday? I go, yeah. And she goes, well, what were you doing when you were my age? And I'm like, wow, don't get me started. You want to know what I was doing? So how about let's start with supporting myself. So anyway, my dad passed when I was 13, and my first job after I had the paper route for 2 years, and then I started a bicycle repair business. And really, I would say the most important thing that ever happened to me in those years was I had a mentor named James O'Donnell, and he said to me, I only met him a couple of times, honestly, but he was the father of my oldest brother's wife. So he was my brother's father-in-law, and he was a successful guy. And he sat me down one day. He never had time for me, but he sat me down one day, and he took me to a hamburger place. And he said, I want to show you my office because I heard you're really good at math and I want to teach you something. So we had lunch. We went to his office, which was nearby, and it was an engineering firm. And he said to me, these words never changed my life. I mean, they never came out of my life. I just think about them so often. He said, because you're good at math, I think you should get an engineering degree and you could have something like this. And when I walked inside, there was this massive room filled with draftspeople. There were draftsmen and draftswomen, I guess, creating buildings and architectural things and whatnot. And I had never seen anything like it in my life. I had never been inside of a company like that. And everybody was addressing him as Mr. O'Donnell. And he said these words. He said, if you get an engineering degree, you can become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a business person. You can get in real estate. You can do whatever you want because it will train your brain to think differently. And so from that point on, anytime somebody asked me, what are you going to be? And I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to be, but I'm going to get an engineering degree because I could be a doctor, lawyer, business person, etc. And so one meeting that lasted a grand total of 2 hours completely changed my life. And all of us, you included, Doug, we all have the opportunity to impact a child's life. And I was very young and very impressionable, and I didn't even know what college was. And so, long story short, I focused on engineering, and I ended up getting a really good score on my SAT math. And Rutgers University offered me a scholarship to pay for my first year of education. So I got into Rutgers engineering and ultimately graduated, and the rest is history.
Just out of curiosity, is he still in your life? Have you ever went back and say, hey, you made such an impact, or I am where I am today because you were willing to take me out for a hamburger and show me an engineering firm?
It's really funny. He died about 10 years ago, and I only talked to him probably 5 or 6 times from the time he gave me that advice to the time he passed 10 years ago. And every time I saw him, I told him how he
Mm,
completely changed the trajectory of my life.
that's incredible. I wrote this question down. I think it's interesting. So, I mean, I lost my mom, and again, same thing. I was young, and my life changed because I had two men come into my life and really do the same thing that this man did for you. But for everyone who goes through something tragic as we have at a young age and make it and turn their life around and do something good with it, there are those who are unable to respond that way, or at least don't respond that way. Can you talk to that person that may be listening? Maybe they've gone through something tragic in their life, and maybe they never have had vision for their life, or maybe they did, but it just died with that tragedy. What would you say to them about coming out from that? Because you could have just given up, said, man, my life's just going to be doom and gloom. I'll never amount to anything, but you didn't. Can you talk to that person?
Yeah. So before I talk to that person, I want to say one thing which is important. It's so often that I bump into people, and you probably do too, where they're having problems in their life and they'll put their hand on my shoulder and say, "You don't understand. I lost a parent when I was young." And I go, "Oh, okay." So that gives you a reason, an excuse. So the first thing I would tell people that have been through something hard is oftentimes we use things as a reason to hold us back. And I heard a speaker once say, there's 1,000 reasons why we can't be who we become until we become unreasonable. And that is take every reason holding you back and just move them aside. So take all those reasons and realize those are the reasons that actually you can use to catapult yourself. But I think the most important thing is we as human beings so often think, and I'm going to separate people into two categories, that we need some type of assistance. And when that assistance isn't there, we kind of give up. And the truth is, you have to make your assistance. And what I mean by that is, I have seen with my siblings, and I'm going to be a little bit raw here, the ones where family members came in and rushed in to help them, they have had more issues than the ones who were like, look, we've burned the boats. We have no other option. We just have to put our head down, go to work, and make things happen. And like you, I don't know you that well, but I know that you pursued a path of learning as much as you could from as many people as you can. So you made a decision. So if I were talking to those people, I would say, look, number one, be hungry and learn as much as you possibly can. Number two, be unreasonable. Take all the reasons off the table because they don't matter. People have come back from the most horrific things. And I would say the third thing is it's very important for people, I believe, and in this world we don't have this one precious thing called time. It's important for people to take time out of their life and figure out, why am I here? And we fill every nook and cranny of our life, so there's no time for anything. And I often tell people close to me, what's your purpose? And they go, I don't know, I really haven't figured it out yet. And then a year later, what's your purpose? Well, I don't know, I haven't figured it out yet. And I'm like, if Jeff Bezos, who's the second wealthiest man on planet Earth, could take a week every month to read books in a hotel room, how come you can't take the time out to figure out your purpose? So that's what I would say to them.
Yeah, so along those same lines, I watched your TED Talk, great talk, and I love what you said. You said the world needs what's in your heart, so do the hard work of finding your purpose. And then you told about how you did that. Can you just share, if you need more context for where I'm coming from, let me know, but how you took a personal retreat and basically said, I'm not coming out of here until I have a purpose. Can you talk about that weekend and kind of that process? Because, okay, I'm going to go find my purpose. Now what? What do I do?
Yeah. So from about the age 16, when I realized that my purpose was to wake people up to their potential, it didn't really feel right. And I had that as my purpose for a long time, for over 20 years. And then when I was in my late 30s, I'm 53 right now, I actually went into a log cabin in Colorado, and I said to this guy, I'm not leaving until I've got my purpose articulated. And it was really a decision that I didn't want to go a minute further in my life without fully embracing a purpose that would inspire me for the rest of my life. And what I ended up with, and it just is so who I am, is I exist to inspire entrepreneurship. Very simple. That's what I do. And I'm doing that right now. That's why I agreed to be on this call. But the other thing you mentioned, you started with the TED Talk, is I believe that every day a human being lives, every day that they live without their purpose, they're ripping off the planet. I mean, they're really ripping people off. And that's how much passion I have around this topic. So when I see people that aren't living up to their potential, or they're on social media, or they're staring at screens, or they're binge watching Netflix, all that tells me is they have decided to not figure out what their purpose is. And binge watching Netflix is more important.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned this in the TED Talk, and there's a whole other video on this, but at some point you had a mentor come into your life and say, hey, you're either going to be a rider or a horse. And that dramatically changed your life to this day. Can you talk about that statement, what it means to you and how it changed you?
Absolutely. Great question. So at my dad's, after he died, I grew up Catholic, and we were at church, and the priest had this huge congregation to honor my dad. And he said these words, which, again, they're burned in my brain. It's funny how I feel like I've been put in these situations to learn important things, but I paid attention. And I think that's another thing. We've got to pay attention. And I often say that a lot of people don't have enough money to pay attention. But the priest said, yeah, the priest said, I'm going to say something. And my hope is that one person in this congregation hears what I'm about to say. I don't know why he said that. His name was Father Bob. And I actually went back to him after, and I said, why did you say that? He goes, I don't know. And so he's talking to this mass of people. There was probably 1,000 people there. I don't know exactly. And he said, all right, this is for all of you, but if one of you hears me, then that's great. He said, in life, you could choose to be the horse or the rider of the horse, but whatever you choose, life will choose to be the other thing. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. And he said, so if life chooses to become the rider, then you're the horse, and life will take you wherever it wants you to go. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. So life's the rider, I'm the horse, etc. He goes, but you can choose to be the rider of the horse, and you could take life wherever you want it to go. And I said to myself at that moment, I'm getting on the horse. And it's kind of interesting because I've had people debate me on this. Is it better to be the horse or the rider? Well, the truth is, are we really in control at any point in time? Well, of course not. If we don't figure out what our purpose is, if we don't figure out what our values are, if we don't figure out who are the important people that we should build relationships with, if we don't figure out anything, yeah, then of course life will be the rider and you're the horse, and it will drag you all over the place. But you absolutely positively have control over your time and taking time away to figure all these important things out, which many people don't do.
Yeah. So it seems like at one point in your journey, you made an interesting decision. And I don't know if even it was when you heard this, but you had a very successful job. You were making a ton of money early on in your career, pretty safe spot. And then you, at one point, just decided to jump off a cliff, so to speak, and dive into entrepreneurship. And then a year and a half later in your story, you shared that you were $180,000 in debt after that. And now, X amount of years later, you're super passionate about entrepreneurship and getting people to make that jump. Can you talk about that journey? What made you actually leave a place where it would have been easier to stay and just be safe and comfortable versus launching? And then not only that, but a year and a half later to be like, man, I jumped and it looks like I'm drowning. What enabled you to just not throw in the towel and just be like, I'm a failure, I'm done with. And now 20 years later, you're here because you didn't give up. Talk about that whole process.
Well, I think it's a mindset. So let's talk about, I have a cushy job. I'm 30. I'm a partner in a very successful brokerage firm in New York City. And I decided to leave. And there was a lot of upside. It was the late 90s. Everything was going like this, going up because of the internet boom and blah, blah, blah. In fact, the stock of the company that I sold out of went up something like 65-fold after I sold out. So I sold out for a low amount of money, started my business, invested every dime I ever had, and was $180,000 in debt. And I remember seeing my old partners, and they're like, what an idiot, Rick. How could you be that stupid? And I said, stupid? I'm free. I felt like an eagle who jumped off of a cliff and was flying because it wasn't about the money. And the mindset that I'm talking about is very simply that. It's not about the money. You think about stories, they're very famous now. Bill Gates wasn't paying himself. It was in the early years of Microsoft. He was sleeping by his desk, and Ross Perot called him and offered them $50 million to buy Microsoft. It was very early on. And Bill Gates said, Mr. Perot, thank you, but I'm not doing this for the money. And you've heard the famous stories about Steve Jobs who worked for $1. Now, everybody who uses Microsoft and, Apple products and flies Southwest Airlines and all of that, they think these are wealthy entrepreneurs. No, these are people that chose every day that their purpose was more important than money. And yes, ultimately they grew a business. But the mindset has to be, it's not about the money. It's about your purpose. And I dream about, I know you saw this in one of my videos, I dream about what would the world be like if 1 billion people, just 1 out of 7, if 1 billion people figured out their purpose and lived their purpose. The world would just be so incredible. People would be dancing in the streets instead of putting their heads down looking at games on their iPhone.
Yeah. So talk about, I want to put the two together. So you want 1 billion entrepreneurs, that would be phenomenal. But a lot of times, especially nowadays, where Facebook buys all the, Instagram for $1 billion, there's all these young kids that are saying, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be an entrepreneur. But it seems like, and sometimes maybe they're following their passion and their purpose, but a lot of times they may be chasing, I want to be a billionaire, right? Can you talk about money though, just in general? Like, you've had it, you haven't had it. What can money do for someone, for all of those who are chasing maybe entrepreneurship for the wrong reasons versus out of purpose? What would you say to them about, hey, yeah, even if you arrive at this point and are making this much, you'll be empty if it's not following your purpose? What would you say?
All right. Well, let's take a step back to start with one thing, because we're using the word entrepreneurship, which means different things to different people. To me, an entrepreneur, and this is our definition with our nonprofit, an entrepreneur is someone who takes responsibility for outcomes, plain and simple. You're either taking responsibility for outcomes or you're a victim. And so a stay-at-home mom who cares deeply about how her kids turn out, even though she doesn't have a business, she is definitely an entrepreneur. And anybody could have that choice to be an entrepreneur. So let's start there. So if you begin with the notion that I'm going to be completely and totally responsible for outcomes, that means you have to choose an outcome. And that outcome that you choose could be to have a business, could be to become a billionaire, etc. But you touched on a lot of different things. I think that the decision to become an entrepreneur and taking responsibility is the first step. And the next step after that is take responsibility for finding your purpose. And if you do that, money invariably will come. So does that mean you're going to be a billionaire? No, I'm not a billionaire. A lot of my friends aren't billionaires, but we live comfortable lives. I think a lot of billionaires just take it to another extreme. They dedicate their entire life to their purpose. For me, I am very passionate about my values. And one of my values is to keep life extremely simple. So even though my wife and I have 4 kids, we have our purposes clearly, but we also value having a really simple life, and that overrides everything else. So I would say the answer to the question when it comes to money is have your purpose, but get really clear on what your values are, because your values may not be that you want to be a billionaire. And I've been offered money for some of our holdings that would make me extremely wealthy, and I'm not ready to sell yet because, again, I don't know that it would make my life that simple to sell. So long story short, we have a holding company. I founded it 23 years ago and make investments. We don't often sell those investments, and so we like to ride them out for a really long time. And one of the reasons why I do that is because, number one, you don't have to pay taxes if you're not selling. But number two, I like the lifestyle I have now. And I want my children to grow up a certain way. They're still young, as I mentioned. So I think it's just as important to figure out what your goals are and what your purpose is as it is to figure out what your values are. And I'm actually in the middle of getting a book published by a major publisher called Who's in Your Room? How the people you surround yourself with will determine your destiny. And Who's in Your Room is really about figuring out what your values are and only letting people in the room of your life that align. And Doug, you've heard this, I'm sure, Albert Einstein talked about the theory of compounding interest being the most incredible thing that he's ever seen. I don't know if that's true, but I think the theory of compounding decisions, if from this point forward in your life, Doug, this point forward, right now, today, every decision you made was fully aligned with your purpose and your values, there's no question that even if you didn't have $1 billion in the bank, you'd have $1 billion worth of relationships and $1 billion worth of freedom. So I focus on this every single day. Am I making decisions in full alignment with my purpose and in full alignment with my values? Because I know one thing, every problem I've ever had in my life was when I made a decision that was not in alignment with my values, or I let somebody into my life that I knew was not in full alignment. So that's what I would say to that.
So good. I want to ask 1,000 follow-up questions. Let me focus on the surrounding yourself with great people. Again, I just saw a clip, so I don't have a lot of context, but at one point you said, hey, I want to spend time with billionaires. I want to get around billionaires and see what they think. Can you just talk about maybe how you network, how you actually get doors open with some of these people, what you've learned from spending time with billionaires or very sharp leaders? Talk about that process, because even doing these podcast interviews, all people say to me, wow, I can't believe you got a meeting with Rick. How did you do that? And I mean, for me, it's just like I just asked, right? But can you just talk about maybe some tips out there for those who want to broaden their scope of who they connect with?
Yeah, so very interesting. I decided after the crash in 2008 that, and really the whole world was in a perilous situation, if that's a word, I think it is. I needed some calm. I was on edge. My wife was like, man, you've got to do something different. So I had a New Year's resolution for January 1st, 2008, to meet 10 billionaires that year. And I wanted to meet people that were quote unquote self-made. I don't think anybody's really self-made, but you get what I mean. Mm-hmm. They weren't victims. They were at cause in their life. And so I really just put the word out to my network. And ironically, and this has become kind of a famous story in a sense, is I put the word out. I wanted to meet billionaires. And I sit on this charity board, and we were having an event. It was like the third week of January. And there was a table set up, and it said, have lunch with a billionaire, bid on lunch. And the first guy on the list was a guy named Ray Hunt, who's got a net worth of about $9 billion here where I live in Dallas. And what was really funny is I put my name on the list, and there was 3 other billionaires there, and I put my name, and I had lunch with 4 billionaires for a total expenditure of less than $5,000. It was so cheap. And the reason was other people didn't value that. And it blew my mind. And shortly after that, having dinner with these 4 guys, started out as lunch, then it became dinner, then it became mentorship. But shortly after that event, there was a radio interview with a guy that bid $500,000 to have lunch with Warren Buffett. And I thought I got much more value because I'm a shareholder in Berkshire Hathaway, and I go to their annual meetings every year, and I hear him answer questions. So I felt like I knew Buffett, but these guys, it was fascinating how open they were to giving me anything, full access. I got to know all their assistants. I got to know their families, became very close to these 4. All right, so that happened. So now I'm like, okay, I knocked out 4 of the first 2 months of the year. So I blasted my network, and I was offered the opportunity to do a fundraiser for Virgin Unite with another guy. And we started, me and this other guy started this thing where Richard Branson brings people to Necker Island, brings groups of entrepreneurs. This was the first one. And I got to spend 4 days with Richard Branson. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. And it just kept snowballing like that. And ultimately, it ended up being, I met 40 separate entrepreneurs over a period of about 3 years. Depending on when I spoke, the number kept getting higher. But what I realized at about 30 was it's not about the money. And so I started pursuing other people. I spent a day with the Dalai Lama. I met, before he passed away, Stephen Covey, and spent the day with him. He was fascinating, by the way. I started meeting elected people, spent a lot of time with Rick Perry and Rudy Giuliani and people like that. And because what I realized is if you pursue the business path, you can have $1 billion in net worth. But if you pursue a spiritual path, you might be like Mother Teresa or the Dalai Lama, or you might pursue a political path and have success there that's not measured in dollars. And so what I realized from that is successful people are very clear on their reason for being on this earth and on their values. And that is why when you, the listener, or you, Doug, or me, Rick, when you ask an extremely successful person a question like, hey, do you want to sit on a board of a company I'm starting? Or, hey, would you like to invest in this opportunity? Or, hey, would you like to go out to dinner? What they do is they go through their mental checklist and they go, oh my God, I'm so glad that you asked me. Thank you so much, Doug. But no, unfortunately, I'm busy. Meaning, when you're clear, your yes-no decisions are snap decisions. And very successful people say no a hell of a lot more than they say yes. And I love the quote from Buffett. He goes, the difference between successful people and extremely successful people is that extremely successful people say no a hell of a lot more than they say yes. And they say no to almost everything. And that's exactly how Buffett says it. And he says it almost every shareholder meeting. But what do people who aren't successful do? We're addicted to yes. Say yes to everything. And where was this study? Oh, you've got to see this, Doug. It's fascinating. The New York Times did an article on Steve Jobs. They wanted to see how many iPads he had in his house in 2010 because he had 3 little kids. And they go to his house, and the guy's sitting there. He goes, I know your house is filled with electronics, and you have iPhones everywhere and iPads everywhere. How many iPads do you have? He goes, we don't have any. We don't believe in electronics at home.
Wow.
The founder of the iPad and the iPhone said, we don't believe in electronics at home.
That's crazy.
And you could read the article. It's a New York Times
Wow.
article. But the rest of the world is missing out on life because they're addicted to electronics. It's kind of funny.
Wow.
So why I even brought that up, because I love the quote from Jobs that's become famous. He said, at Apple, I am more proud of the thousands of things we said no to than the handful of things we said yes to. That's so cool. So what is this saying? So all you listeners, is what it's saying is you should only be saying yes to a few things, to a few key relationships, to a few key business ideas, to a few key distractions from your family and from your important relationships with your children, etc. And only say yes to things that fully align with your purpose, fully align with your values, and fully align with your important objectives. That is the secret to living a life that's completely bountiful and successful.
Yeah. So in that, you said your first strategy was, hey, I'm going to blast my network. Someone has to know someone, right? The power of social capital. Mm-hmm. You've exposed yourself to, I'm sure, tons of leadership development organizations and programs, and getting around some of these leaders. And you also lead something called the Business Finishing School. Can you talk about the importance of these programs, what your program, Business Finishing School, offers, and why it's so important for people to get connected with types of programs like that?
Yeah, I read a stat. I hope it's not true, but it said that after high school, only 15% of people really care about growth and success. I don't know if it's true, but it probably is. You and I are similar in that we have an insatiable appetite for learning and growth. And so from a very early age, I was oriented around learning. And so I've taken programs. I've had an executive coach for 30 years. I go to a psychotherapist. And I take when I had a startup when I was 30, I've had the same companies for 23 years, but a huge amount of my time has always been diverted to personal growth. And that's trips and conferences and books and coaching, as I mentioned. And I would say probably 30% of my business time goes there. So that's an orientation that I believe that the listeners need to say, you know what? I'm not doing that. Maybe I should. Now, if you don't believe it, you probably wouldn't be listening to this far in. But I believe, number one, you have to have an orientation around learning and growth. But long story short, about 2010, so many people have been calling me for advice and mentorship and whatnot that I decided to put all of my principles about life into a 48-module business program. And it's really a personal program as well. And so we decided to call it Business Finishing School. And there's 48 modules. They're either video or audio, and there's a workbook associated with it. And it's really been a passion project that I've had a lot of fun with. Twice a year, I do a boot camp, and I teach these principles in September and March. And it's just phenomenal for the people. It's phenomenal for me because I get to live my purpose. I get to inspire entrepreneurship with the crowd. And we've had more than 1,000 companies through. And I mean, that's Business Finishing School. The cool thing about it, I love this, is when we started, I decided that we're only going to release one module per month. So if you join, you only get to watch one video a month. And a lot of people say, well, I want to see all 48 modules. I want it all. And I go, well, if you want it all right now, then you're not a good customer for us. Go do something else. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I go, do you have Rosetta Stone? I said, yeah, I have Rosetta Stone. Okay, where's Rosetta Stone? Well, it's in a box in my closet. I go, yeah. If you want to learn a foreign language, you got to speak that foreign language every day. And they say if you speak it every day, you learn it in 4 years. Well, that's exactly how we feel about the language of business and success. It takes 4 years. We'll give you one module per month. And the very first month we start with values-based decision-making and the doorman principle. And because we want you to have the foundation first. And so that's the genesis of Business Finishing School. It's something I'm real passionate about. And the website's businessfinishingschool.com if you're interested. The cool thing is it's only $10 for the first month, and there's a money-back guarantee.
That is awesome. Very cool. And I'll include a link to that in the show notes. So for time, I just going to kind of do a lightning round and just throw a bunch of short questions at you quickly. First thing is just on entrepreneurship, just real open-ended. If you have one piece of advice for entrepreneurs, what would it be?
Don't value money over purpose. When people look at money, they look at risk, and I see this often. A week doesn't go by where a conversation doesn't happen that goes like this. I can't start my business. I've got a spouse and young kids. I go, you can't not start your business. So you're going to be, the prison walls get tighter and tighter and tighter the older you get. So my definition of eternity is the time between when you know you should make a decision and when you actually make it. The time that elapses is eternity.
That's so good. You talked about one of your values with you and your wife is we want to have a simple life. But yet, if you looked at everything that you have your hand in, a lot of people would say, wow, that's so complicated. How do you, I've heard you talk about keeping a rhythm, and you're all about rhythms. Can you talk about how you manage your life so it remains simple in the midst of everything else you do?
Yeah, great question. So the first time I met my wife, I said, would you be willing to go on date night with me every Monday night? And we haven't missed one in almost 14 years of dating and marriage. So I call this liberating structures, having very simple structures in your life to liberate you so you don't have to think about it. So rather than saying, when are we going to have dinner? What, you want to go out Thursday night or Friday night? It's just Monday night at 7:30. The babysitter knows, my wife knows, the kids know, my employees know, the world knows, the restaurant knows because we tend to go to the same restaurant. It simplifies everything. So we use a tremendous amount of rhythms. We have family dinners every night. And I know when I'm working out because I've had the same trainer and the same workout routine for over 10 years. And in my businesses, the ones that we own, I have the same meeting rhythms with my CEOs. Now, to some people, that might sound boring. But McDonald's didn't grow from one store to 40,000 or whatever they have by keeping things complex. They have rhythms and systems and habits. And I love the Bill Gates quote. He said, a great business is nothing more than a series of great habits, and a bad business is nothing more than no habits or horrible habits. And human beings that are resistant to systems and processes and rhythms and structure, they're going to have a hard time being successful. They really will. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. It's a lightning round, so I'll move on.
No, you are. And just along those lines, because I heard you talk about it, I thought it was funny and true. Someone was like, wow, Rick, I want to spend a day with you. And they offered to pay you X amount of money to spend a day with you. And I thought your answer back to them was hilarious, but probably true. Can you just share that answer?
Yeah, funny thing. And the guy was relentless. He offered to pay me $10,000. He wanted to follow me around. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, you're going to be bored out of your mind because my days are very structured. And he goes, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, let me just email you my calendar. So he looked at the calendar and he goes, no, I still want to come, because it was a full day. And I'll share why in a moment. But I go, what do you want to learn from me? He goes, I want to see you negotiate. I want to see you in fights with people. I want to see you, reacting. I go, that's not my life. My life is extremely organized. Everything's scheduled just like this call. So one of the deals that my wife and I have family dinner 6 nights a week. On Wednesdays, though, I leave the office to work out early in the morning, and I work till midnight every Wednesday. And I do that, and I have always done that for over 25 years, because my wife knows where I am, and I don't have to say, oh, we've got a client in town. If there's a client coming in town, I have to do something. I always schedule it on Wednesday nights. Again, simplicity. It just makes life simple. Everybody knows where I am on Wednesday nights. I'm working late. If I have to go out of town, I typically try to do it on a Wednesday night, etc. Long story short, this guy comes to town. He has dinner with me and my family at my house on Tuesday night, goes to his hotel, comes to my office Wednesday morning, and I had a full day. There were several interviews. There was a news thing. There was a board meeting. There was a dinner that night. And at the end of the day, he goes, you were right. And he said, the weirdest thing about the whole day was you did exactly what was on your calendar. And I said, what did you mean? He goes, my calendar gets blown up every day. And to me, I just thought, that is the weirdest thing. How could somebody not just honor their calendar? But then as I walk around, how many people cancel things at the last minute? Their life is a chaotic mess. So I realized one of the things that makes most successful people successful is they actually commit to the things that they've committed to, and they do them. And their life isn't about, last minute putting out fires. It is so incredibly rare that me or my wife have to put out a fire. We just schedule things and we do them.
So good. You said you spent 30% of your time on growth. I'm just curious, what books do you find yourself giving away most often, or what podcasts do you listen to the most? What recommended resources do you have for leaders?
Wow. It's funny. It depends what I'm reading at the moment. And the book that I've given away in the last week the most, because it's absolutely, and I'm using superlatives right now to stress it, most incredible book I've ever read. It's called Alexander Hamilton, and there's a play about it called Hamilton. But here's a guy that single-handedly, and I didn't realize this, and most people didn't study history of the United States through the eyes of Alexander Hamilton, but when we won the Revolutionary War, there was no banking system, there was no contract law, there was no judicial system, there was no money, there was no coins, there was no dollar bills, there was no Coast Guard, military, there was nothing. And this guy studied Greek and Roman history and decided to come up with the 3 branches of government and push the Constitution and pushed us having a Coast Guard, because the Britons were like basically robbing every ship that came off the ports in America, and put in place the whole infrastructure that we as Americans now use to create all of our wealth. One man thought all that up. Of course, he needed help, but the book is fascinating if you have not read Alexander Hamilton's book. So the books over the years, I love Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you have not read that is just so incredibly simple and straightforward. That's probably my most recommended book over the last 30 years. In addition to that, I love just the writing style of Ayn Rand. She wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. Just to have people realize that a human being on purpose is unstoppable. In addition to that, I love Vern Harnish's book, The Rockefeller Habits, which is basically Stephen Covey's work, but applied to a business. So that's what's top of mind right now.
So good. I usually say if you could go back and have coffee with your 20-year-old self, but given your trajectory, I'd say if you could go back and have coffee with your 10-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Wow. And I read through the pre-questions that you gave me. By the way, Doug Smith is an awesome interviewer. I love how you approach this whole thing in a very serious way. Oftentimes when I do interviews, no one's prepared. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for doing it. Yeah.
To my 10-year-old self, I would say I didn't let life happen. I pushed so hard for so many years. And oftentimes success comes over time. And I just wanted so much. So for most of my life, my foot was on the gas pedal. and I never took a break. So what do I mean by that? When I was about 28, I went to Italy and I discovered this beach in Italy, and I've been there over 20 times now. And I realized that it's just as important to take a break and to relax. And it has nothing to do with money. You could just go into a park, but it's very important to relax and to trust that the universe will provide. I don't know how spiritual your listeners are, but the most successful people that I've ever met, the reason why they're not in a hurry often is because they have a profound trust that the universe will provide. And people that are scarcity minded don't. So if I'm talking to my 10-year-old self, I would say, Rick, listen, you're going to have a good life. You just have to trust the universe. You can't do it all yourself, and you can't have your foot on the gas all the time, because that's just going to upset the people around you. That's my advice.
That's good. Out of everything you've accomplished so far in your life, what are you most proud of?
Wow. This plays into everything I'm saying, and it's too late for you to take this advice, but I'm sure you've done well here, is when I was about 37, hard to remember, I was sitting with a good friend of mine who I'd known for 20 years, and he said, I know you want to get married. I know you want to be a dad. You haven't really had a serious girlfriend. He goes, take the time and write a list of all the attributes of the perfect woman for you. And I wrote this list, and he said, don't have anything physical. So the only physical thing on the list, yeah, because you don't want to say tall, this kind of body, and this kind of hair. But the only physical thing on the list was that I had to be attracted to her.
Sure.
But I had 27 things on the list of what I wanted in a perfect bride. And here's where this is really cool and efficient for human beings, is when you have a list, it's really easy to make yes-no decisions. So I had a lot of first dates, because I would look at the first date, I'd look at the list, I'm like, okay, this isn't a match.
Did you have like a card underneath the table where you're like checking things off? No,
but the cool thing about this is just doing the exercise made me so conscious of what I wanted. And, I have a big family, and I saw a lot of just broken marriages, not necessarily divorces. And this is an ironic thing. All of my siblings are married, and we've got 260 years of marriage between us and not one divorce.
Wow.
But the point is, I made a list of what I thought would be a marriage based on mutual values, that we would both thrive. And so it was funny. Several years after I made the list, I was on a date with Melissa, and I wasn't thinking about the list because I had been on so many first dates and it didn't work. And I remember going home and calling my buddy Dave, and I go, Dave, I think I met her. It was a first date. He goes, what do you mean? I said, she honors every single thing on the list.
Wow.
And I knew. And on the second date, I brought the list. I put it in front of her, and she goes, okay, so what? And I said, that's my girl. Like, she didn't. She knew. She just knew I was the right one for her. I knew she was the right one for me. But had I not taken the time and taken the steps to go through consciously what I was looking for, I couldn't have manifested it. Is that story important to people? I think it is when it comes to who you hire, when it comes to the type of business you start. It's so funny, just a business thing for all the entrepreneurs out there. I have a small handful of rules for businesses that I invest in. And one of those rules is that 80% of their revenue has to derive from recurring revenue. Businesses that start every month and have to go eat what they kill and have a sales force and are constantly trying to create revenue, that's okay. There's a lot of successful businesses that way, but I like simplicity. So simplicity is recurring revenue. And so why am I bringing that up? Because when I think about our rules, they're all pretty simple, but it allows me to say no really fast, just like dating. So what often happens is an entrepreneur comes up with an idea, they spend a little money on it, they borrow money from their family, they're 3 years in, and they're saying, wow, this is so hard. And I say, well, if you had a simple list of rules, you wouldn't even have started that business. You would have saved 3 years. So, one of the quotes I love, it's people normally don't make the same mistake twice. They normally make it 20 or 30 times. So
nice.
Stop making the same mistakes. Have one of the modules we teach is called rules-based decision making. Have simple rules for all aspects of your life. And here's a funny one. I remember reading this book, is everything in life I learned in kindergarten, and it's a book by, I think the author's name is Brown. I've given it out to people. But one of the things, reading this book, I'm like, I don't know, 16 or 17, I can't remember. And one of the things is he has a simple rule. He says, don't stay out past 10 p.m. because bad stuff happens after 10 p.m. And I always kind of had that rule. And the few times that I've stayed out after 10 p.m. when I was younger, I got in trouble. So I'm bringing it up because you can have really simple rules that have profound consequences in your life. Simple rule in my family, I mentioned it, my wife and I have date night every Monday night. So rather than, people say often they come up with a goal for the year and they'll say, I want to improve my marriage this year. And I'm like, that's not really a goal. Like, how do you know you did that? So I often say a goal without a rhythm is just a dream. So I'm like, instead of having a goal of improving your marriage, why don't you have a rhythm of having date night every Monday night at 7:30? And I know you'll have the effect of your marriage improving. And so the point of that is, why Monday night? Because the restaurants are empty, and because there's no traffic, and because we know we'll get in and out, and blah, blah, blah.
Listen to you, the strategist. That's awesome.
I mean, why not keep things simple?
Yeah. Last few questions are pretty simple, though. Most important one, I always ask, what do you want your legacy to be? At the end of your life, what would you want your children and others and everyone who's been impacted by your life to say about you?
Yeah. I would love for them to say that here's a guy that truly believed in the spirit of entrepreneurship and that really want to impact people's lives. And, I want to impact life from this perspective. If people could take time away and figure out their purpose, that would be the most important thing to me, that the world on purpose would have a profound effect on humanity. So I would like them to say that Rick really cared about people living a life that was aligned with their purpose.
I love that. And you mentioned the Business Mastery School, and maybe you want to mention that again, but how would you like our audience to connect with you? What's the best way, and where can they go?
There's two places. One is businessfinishingschool.com, and they can register for $10 there. Or two, www.businessframe.com. Just for this call, we decided to set up a simple worksheet for people to think about their life from a frame. In the Business Finishing School program, we tell people, look, you can't really get to the next level quickly unless you're clear about the business frame. And that is, there's 6 steps. Number 1, what's the purpose of the business? What's the purpose of your life? Number 2, what's your catalyzing statement? And a catalyzing statement is a get to of your purpose. So to be very clear on that, they could watch a TED talk on it if they just Google my name and TED, or I could explain it right now. If Bill Gates' purpose was to have Microsoft be the most recognizable software company on earth, it wasn't until he came up with this catalyzing statement, which was to get to, and that was a computer on every desktop. And that changed everything for Microsoft. So purpose number 1, catalyzing statement number 2. Number 3, real business strategy. And in Business Finishing School, we tell people, look, people don't know what strategy means. So you have to have a clear strategy that doesn't change. And that's defining your ideal customer, defining your ideal what business are we in? And most people don't even know who their ideal customer is. They're not really clear what business they're in. And lastly, how are you delivering your product or service? And that's the business strategy, the who, what, and how. And if you think about Amazon day one, they had a really clear business strategy. Their what was, we sell books. Bottom line, why do they sell books? Because they're cheap to ship and cheap to store and they're tiny. Who? People that are on the internet. How? Well, the how is pretty interesting. The how was they're going to be in distributed warehouses all over the place, and they're going to deliver the books by fourth-rate mail, which was like a quarter of the price. So the point is, as Amazon grew, they never changed that strategy. It was only books. It was only to people on the internet, and it was what's the last thing? It was only shipped. They didn't have bricks and mortar and all that. And so as they grew, their losses kept going up, and Bezos was being attacked by Wall Street. And he's like, no, this is our strategy. Once we build enough mass, then we'll start selling other stuff. So I think it's incredibly important for people understand what their business frame is. And so we're going to go through it again. Number 1, purpose. Number 2, catalyzing statement. Number 3, real business strategy. Number 4, values. Number 5, your long-term objectives have to be crystal clear. And number 6, your quarterly objectives. And I love what the guy who ran General Electric said. What was his name? Who's the guy that ran
Jack Welch?
Jack Welch, yeah. He said, this is a great quote from him. He said, when I look at a business, I want to know what their goals are 20 years from now and what their quarterly goals are. The middle will take care of itself if they're clear on those two things. And I think he's 100% right. So that's the business frame. There's a worksheet at businessframe.com. And I encourage everybody to use it. I'm here to give you simple tools to create value in your life. That's it.
I love that. Anything else you want to leave us with?
I would say that it saddens me when you read the stats that the average person in America spends 40 hours watching screens per week. And there's a famous story about Michelangelo, who did the Statue of David and painted the Sistine Chapel. And his friends would come to him because it took him 4 years to paint the Sistine Chapel. And he would be there every single day, sometimes 24 hours in a row. And his friends would come and they're like, Michelangelo, what are you doing? Why don't you come out? I mean, we're partying. You never want to come out and party with us. Don't you want to have any fun? And his response to them was, it's a very famous story again, was, if you knew how much fun I was having, living my purpose, you wouldn't ask something so stupid. And the reality is, people think they're actually having fun staring at screens, Facebook and Netflix and all the crap that they do online. So my advice is cut the distractions. And I'm going to leave you with one last story, Doug, which plays right into this. Successful people generally have about 5 priorities and they don't do anything else. And I use my hand as a metaphor. So most people, if I say, what are your priorities in life? They'll say, well, God first, my family second, health and fitness fourth, my business fifth. God first, family second, health and fitness, then my career, and then my hobby. So those are the 5. But if you follow them around, they're spending 90% of the time playing golf, going to strip clubs, doing all the other things, whatever they do. And the most successful people in the world, the people that have true success, great relationships, etc., they only do their 5 things. They only do their 5 things. They're not deviating from that. And I am sure that if anybody listening to this call, if you were to come up with the 5 priorities in your life, one of them would not be Netflix. One of them would not be Facebook, etc. You get the point.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, I took 3 or 4 pages of notes. Thank you so much. This was excellent. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Everyone, thank you so much for listening to our interview with Rick Sapio. You can find ways to connect with Rick and everything that he's doing. You can also watch the interview at l3leadership.org/episode 144. A few things before we wrap up. We recently introduced L3 Leadership Membership. That's right, for just $25 a month, you can get into our breakfast events for free in Pittsburgh. You can get a free L3 Leadership t-shirt. You get access to joining our mastermind groups, access to our member-only site filled with extra content, resources, and courses to help you and your leadership go to the next level. And if you'd like more information on membership, go to l3leadership.org/membership. I want to thank our other sponsor, BAB Inc. They're an insurance broker, third-party administrator, and consulting firm based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and they have business all across the country. And they're led by my friend Russell Livingston, and he has a huge passion for developing next-generation leaders, which is why they host our monthly leadership breakfast to invest in young leaders, and we're so grateful for them. If your organization has any insurance needs, just go to babbins.com. That's BABBINS.com. Lastly, if you want to stay in touch with us and everything we're doing here at L3, you can sign up for our email list at l3leadership.org, and you'll get a free copy of my ebook, Making the Most of Mentoring. Again, if you've been enjoying the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave a rating and review. It really does make a difference. And thank you so much for being a listener. We know there's a ton of options out there, and we really do our best to bring you the best content we can possibly bring you. So thank you again. As always, I like to end with a quote, and usually I quote John Maxwell, don't I? But he said this, I love this. He said, the size of your dream will determine the size of the people you attract. I love that. Thanks for listening and being a part of L3 Leadership. My wife, Laura, and I appreciate you so much, and we'll talk to you in episode number 145. See ya.